Howdy folks, welcome back. Donnie here with you once again with another video in the series for Complete Linux Beginners. And in this video, I'd like to look at the Linux file system. Now, when we use the term file system, that can mean a couple of different things, but in this video, I'm going to use the term file system to describe the manner in which our directories are laid out and to describe what those directories contain. Now, Linux does follow what we call the Filesystem Hierarchy Standard, FHS for short, and this was something that was just created by the big Linux gurus in the sky to ensure that the directories are pretty much standardized on every Linux distro. So you can go from like Red Hat to Debian to Slackware, to Ubuntu, to whatever else, and for the most part, your directories are going to be the same. Now, you may have some minor variations, especially when you get down into the subdirectories, but your top-level directories, for the most part, are going to be the same across all Linux distros, thanks to this FHS. Now, when we talk about our different directories, we do have a couple different ways to describe our directories. We can describe them as either shareable or non-shareable. And when we say shareable, we mean that those directories are going to contain files that can be accessed by any normal unprivileged user. When we say that a directory is non-shareable, it's going to contain files that can only be accessed by somebody with root user privileges. And then we can also classify the directories according to whether they are variable or static. So when a directory is classified as a variable directory, it's going to contain files which are going to be changing on a constant basis or can be changed on a constant basis. For example, log files, user data files, things like that. And static directories are going to contain files which are not meant to be changed on a constant basis. For example, our executable files for our programs. Okay, I'm not saying that they'll never change, because when you do an operating system update, yeah, they'll change that. But they're not meant to be changed on a regular basis. And then we can come down here and we can take a look at what our different directories are. And first off, we have what we call the root, which is the topmost directory. This is going to be the very, very top of the file system. So we can come over here on the virtual machine and we can do a cd/ like that. And that gets us up to the root level, the very, very top of the file system. We can do an ls like that, and this then will show us our top level directories. And we can look back over here and we can see what these top level directories are. We have the bin directory, which is going to be static and shareable. And the bin directory is going to contain executable files for programs that normal users can use. So that's why it's classified as shareable. The normal unprivileged users can use those programs. And of course, it's considered static because the executable files are not meant to be changed on a constant basis. We have the boot directory, which is going to contain our boot up files. It's going to contain the Linux kernel, going to contain the configuration files for the bootloader and configuration files for the kernel, but it's considered static and non-shareable as well. Well, it's considered non-shareable because only somebody with root user privileges can go in and change those configuration files. Now, if you're a non-privileged user, you can cd into that boot directory and into the bootloader configuration directory, but you have to have root user privileges in order to actually do any type of configuration on those files in there. We have the dev directory, which is a device file directory. And device files, there's something that merit their own video, so we'll talk about them later. But basically, in a nutshell right now, device files are going to be the files that represent the different devices on your system. They're going to be like the interface between you and the device itself. The etc directory is going to contain your basic configuration files. So you can go into the etc and you will see in there a lot of things that end with .conf. So these are going to be configuration files for different parts of the operating system, for your different daemons, and so forth. Then we have the home directory. Well, I like to refer to that as the /home directory. And this is going to be the first one of the bunch here, which is considered as a variable directory. But the reason I call it the /home directory is because it contains home directories of all the users except for the root user. So it's kind of confusing. It's another one of those terms that has multiple meanings. So just to differentiate that home directory for the different users and that top level home directory, I just like to call it the /home directory. But we can go over here and we can look in here, and you can see that indeed it does have these directories for all my different users. And we also have a marketing directory in there, which I created myself for a marketing group. But whenever you create a new user account, you're going to get a home directory for that user within this /home directory. Next up is going to be the lib directory, and on 64-bit operating systems, we're also going to have a lib64 directory. So these are going to be our program library files. These files are going to contain code that's going to be common to a lot of different programs. So instead of putting that same code in each and every program that ever gets written, we have these program libraries, and then we'll just have our programs then hook to those program libraries. It's kind of like the same concept as .dll files in Windows, if you know what they are. Next up is going to be the media directory. And this is going to be for removable media, for creating mount points in your system for removable media. So, like, for example, if you were to take a USB memory stick and plug that into your computer, into your USB port, that would automatically get mounted under this /media directory. And then we have the MNT, which is kind of similar, but that's going to be a mount point for temporary file systems. And so, for example, you just have a drive that you want to mount temporarily. You want to manually mount it rather than having it automatically mount, as would happen under the media directory. Then you would just go ahead and create a mount point in there. OPT directory is going to be for third-party applications. And the example that's given here is for OpenOffice. Of course, LibreOffice has pretty much replaced OpenOffice everywhere. But an example of how that would be used would be like if you have a Linux distro that has really, really old packages in it, and CentOS is a good example of that. The LibreOffice package in CentOS is really, really old. So let's say that you want to have the latest and greatest version of LibreOffice. You can just go to the LibreOffice website, download the installer, and run that installer. And then it will put the LibreOffice within this OPT directory instead of within the normal bin directory, as would happen if you were to install the old version of LibreOffice from the official CentOS repository. Okay, so this is going to be one of two places where we can install third-party applications. We'll look at the other place in just a few moments. Next, we have the Proc Directory. The Proc Directory and the Dev Directory as well. I forgot to mention that, but Proc and the Dev are what we refer to as virtual file systems. In other words, those two directories don't actually exist on the hard drive. They get built from scratch every time you boot up the computer, and they only exist in system memory as long as you have the computer running. And when you shut the computer down, then the Dev Directory and the Proc Directory will go away. So what does the Proc Directory do for us then? Well, we can go over here and we can take a look, and all of those numbered directories you see over on the left, each one of them represents a process ID of some user mode process that's running on the system. So, and then all the other stuff there on the right with the names represent information about the different kernel mode processes going on. So your Proc virtual file system then is going to contain information about the system. Now, we're normally not going to try to look at these files directly. We do have some different utilities which we'll be using to look at the information in these files and directories, but we're not going to get into that right now. We'll cover that later when we get into process management. But for right now, I just want you to know that, hey, this is a Proc directory and this is what it does. Next up is the root. And again, the root, it's another one of those terms that has multiple connotations. We said that when we go out here, that we are at the root of the file system. But if we do an ls, we also see that root directory, which is the home directory for the root user. So whenever you create a normal user, all their home directories will get put into that directory, but the root user's home directory will always be separate. Next is the sbin directory. The sbin directory is going to contain executable files for programs that require root privileges to access. So these are going to be like your system administration tools that you don't want normal unprivileged users to be messing with. The temp directory is for temporary storage. That's kind of self-explanatory. And the var directory, and yes, I'm skipping USR on purpose. The reason will be clear in a moment. But the var directory is going to contain variable data like log files and principals. Now it says here it's variable and shareable. That's not really strictly true, okay? It is going to be variable data, but some of the subdirectories within var are going to be shareable and some will not be. So just for an example, we can go into var and we can look at all the stuff that's there, and the log directory, for example, is going to be non-shareable because for most of the files in here, it requires root privileges in order to look at them. But on the other hand, we do have like the spool file, which is going to contain the different things there for your various users. Like we have the mail spool there, which is going to contain the incoming mail folders for the different normal users. We have the cron, which contains the cron job files. And when I say cron job, I'm talking about our different scheduled jobs, for the different users, etc. So we got a lot of different things in that var directory. We have the db subdirectory within var, which you would think would contain our database files. No, not really. The database files, if you're talking about MariaDB or MySQL, are actually going to be in the var lib directory. So I always thought that was kind of interesting. And then the last one I want to look at is going to be the USR directory. Now, the reason I always save that one till last is because USR contains everything in the kitchen sink. It's like a really, really catch-all directory. It says here it's programs and data for users, static and shareable. Again, that's not necessarily true either. Static, yeah. Shareable, okay, some of the stuff will be shareable and some of it won't be, just like with the var. But we can go over here, go into USR, and we can see here we have another bin directory and another sbin directory. So we have a bin and an sbin at the top level, and then we also have bin and sbin here within the USR. Now, the reasoning that I've been told is the reason for this is that the upper level bin and sbin directories, or the top level bin and sbin directories, I should say, cannot be separated out into their own partitions when you install the operating system. But the USR directory can be separated out into its own partition when you install the operating system. So supposedly, the reason for having bin and sbin directories within that USR directory, and then having the top level bin and sbin directories as well, is that back in the days of Unix, the dark days of Unix, early man did not have storage devices which were large enough to store the entire operating system and all the programs and all the data. So supposedly the reason for having these separate directories like this is because they wanted to put the executable files for programs that are essential for the operation of the operating system in those top-level bin and sbin directories so that they cannot be separated out into their own partitions. But then they created the bin and sbin directories within the USR directory, which can be separated out in its own partition. And in those places, they're putting executable files for programs that are not essential to making the operating system work. So, in other words, they would be like your application programs, your word processor program, your Office Suite program, your web browser, things like that would go into these bin and sbin directories that are within the USR directory. We also have a local directory within USR. And actually, let me show you where we are. Okay, USR local. And we also have a bin and sbin in there. And so these are going to be yet another place where you can install your third-party programs, or if you have like your own shell script, your own program that you've written yourself, and you want to make it available system-wide, you can put them in here within the bin and sbin directories. Also, let's go back up one level here. And we do have a lot of stuff there, but the only other one of these I'm going to look at right now is going to be the share directory. And again, we're in USR share. And this is where we have a whole lot of stuff here and a lot of files that contain information about our different programs that we're using. Most of these you're never going to mess with, okay? They get installed when you install the program, and they might have like default settings for the program, things like that, but you're never going to mess with these for the most part. But there are a couple of these directories in here which you might be interested in, like for example the backgrounds directory. And this is going to contain your files that you can use for your wallpaper. So if you're a desktop user, you want to fancy things up a little bit, you can go to like your digitalblasphemy.com website or wherever else, download some pretty wallpapers, put them in this backgrounds directory, and then they'll be available for your utility that you can use to set your wallpaper. All right. Actually, I may have told you wrong here. I've just noticed there's a wallpapers directory there too. Let's look at that. Okay, yeah, so you got more wallpapers here in this USR share wallpapers directory. So that's another place you put your wallpapers. Okay. Then the other place here, or the other directory here I want to point out is your fonts directory. And you don't have a lot of fancy fonts that come along with your desktop Linux system, but the fonts, for the most part, are going to be just normal true type fonts. So if you want to, I mean, you could go to your 10,001 fonts website and download, true type fonts to your heart's content, and then you can come in here and make another directory, just call it personal fonts or something like that. Put your true type fonts in there, reboot the system, and that will make those fonts available then for your different application programs. So, for example, you can let's go into this Liberation directory, and you can see there's just nothing but plain old true type fonts, the same fonts that you would use on your Windows system. So anyway, I think that is a good introduction for our Linux file system. And in future videos, we can look a little bit more closely at things like what we have in the dev directory, for example. Actually, we'll be looking at our different types of files in general. So until then, I hope you enjoyed the video, and be sure to subscribe and like, and we will see you next time.